right, good afternoon again, everyone. I've got 1 o'clock here and there's still some folks joining, but let's get started. My name is Henry Underwood and I'm a planner at Southwest Region Planning Commission. Many of you have seen me before. If you haven't joined us before, the Monadnock Broadband Group is an informal coalition of municipal officials, practitioners, and other stakeholders with interest in understanding and coordinating relative to broadband issues in Southwest New Hampshire. So last time we came together was October 13th. Our meeting was immediately following Southwest Region Planning Commission's Fall Commission meeting, and this generated some first-time attendees. We heard about, well, at least two important topics. Carol Monroe talked about New Hampshire's recently passed communication district legislation and first steps considerations for communities looking at this option. We also announced the broadband implementation guide. Staff created this as a playbook for communities assessing broadband needs, and it focused on what we call the Chesterfield model and broadband infrastructure bonds. So to get started, I'd just like to give some reminders about participation in our Zoom meetings. You can provide feedback, as is kind of seen here in this toolbar. The participants tab will let you raise your hand, give a thumb up, things like that. You can also see the chat button if you need to send a message to me or another attendee. And if you're joining by phone, you have a kind of unique option to unmute or raise your hand. It's *6 to mute or unmute and *9 to raise your hand. We won't get into personal introductions, unfortunately, but I encourage everyone to open up the chat and introduce yourself, share some contact info, give us some feedback about what you're looking forward to on the agenda. We'll also keep an eye out for questions or any technical difficulties. As far as the agenda today, we've got 2 presentation topics. Those are agenda items 2 and 3, and we'll have a good chunk of time in each of those for questions and answers. And let's see, other reminders. We'll plan on going as late as 2:30 in this meeting, but if we're winding down, finish up earlier, that is fine too. So if there aren't any questions, not seeing any yet, let's just dive into agenda item 2. As a little bit of background, one of the most newsworthy, notable events that occurred between our last meeting and today was the Federal Communication Commission's announcement of winning bidders for their Rural Digital Opportunity Fund auction. Those were announced last month, around $20 billion nationwide over 10 years. And that is to serve census blocks that either were entirely or partially unserved. SWRBC wanted to bring one or maybe a couple people to explain this program better than we could do in-house anyway. And I reached out to Michelle Cota at Senator Shaheen's office to help make this happen. So Michelle, if you're on, I'll turn to you to do an introduction for Mr. Janson.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Henry. And I'm just confirming Mr. Janson is on the line, right? I've skimmed through our...
Yes, I'm on the line.
That's perfect. Well, welcome everybody. And again, good afternoon. I am thrilled that we are joined by our FCC leader, Director Janson. And before I introduce our guest speaker, if it's all right with you, Henry, if I give just a little bit of a real brief federal update, I think it helps to set the tone for what Director Janson's going to go through today. So I wanted to just briefly touch on the $900 billion COVID response provisions that were signed last month as part of a very large omnibus package That package also included some federal funding for all of our federal agencies through September this year. But within that COVID response provisions, there are about $7 billion to be directed through the FCC as a channel for short-term priorities, such as low-income financial assistance for internet and wireless access, telehealth funding, access for tribal lands and disadvantaged populations, funding to improve mapping and data collection. As you know, Senator Shaheen was a big supporter of the Data Act, which did a lot of improvements to how data was collected for accuracy. Also for replacing Huawei equipment. And the most significant bucket of funds within that $7 billion that we're watching very closely is about $300 million to go for a new possible grant program to fund rural broadband expansion and upgrades. And as you know, all of you know, the current administration is in the midst of appointing President Biden's nominees, including Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel as the new FCC chair. That's an appointment that we're very excited about. She has extensive experience, and she has done incredible work when it comes to rural expansion. So it's exciting to see her nominee in place. And as the Biden administration continues to quickly build out his cabinet, we can expect that the federal agencies will be able to design and implement a lot of these programs that were included in the latest package. But right now, we just don't have a lot of details on what that grant program would look like and what the rollout would be. But as I mentioned before, with the new cabinet being built, that's when we'll be able to see more details of these programs as they are being constructed and rolled out. So have a little patience with these. We expect it to learn more in the coming weeks. So we'll definitely stay in touch with all of you as that evolves and develops. I also wanted to add that Senator Shaheen and many other in Congress are working towards the next COVID response and stimulus package. I think it's important to delineate that the last two packages, the CARES Act package and the last COVID response package, Senator Shaheen views these very much as a COVID relief effort, not specifically a stimulus effort. And she is pushing for additional infrastructure spending and workforce development provisions to be included as part of a recovery to economic growth effort this year. So there's a lot of movement right now in Congress to move ahead with additional funding. She has said repeatedly throughout her meetings around the state that she wants there to be significant broadband funding included in that stimulus effort. So I think you'll be hearing from us quite a bit more as we work with all of you to make sure that that programs and bills are being written so that they are able to have the most impact for New Hampshire specifically as we work to fill in that last mile and upgrade our broadband access throughout the state. So again, we're anxious and optimistic to see what this next administration will bring in regards to rural development. I also want to mention there are a number of other programs offered through, for example, through the USDA and TIA or through Northern Borders Regional Commission, and those are tools for communities to address broadband. But our expert today comes specifically from the FCC, so we're going to stay focused on that for his presentation. So I think, hopefully, thank you so much for allowing me to set the tone for what we're about to see. So today I'm honored to introduce the Director of the Rural Broadband Auctions Task Force and Assistant Chief of the Office of Economics and Analytics for the FCC. Director Michael Janson joins us to share an overview of the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund that Henry presented just a quick overview of. So as he mentioned, we are going to see about 25.257 million over the next 10 years and possibly at different timelines. So I will turn it over to you, Director Janson, to give us an overview of that program and what New Hampshire can expect. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you very much, Henry. I just want to make sure, can you hear me okay before I get started going?
You sound clear.
Okay, great. So I am the director of the Commission's Rural Broadband Auctions Task Force, and we oversee the use of competitive bidding, in this context auctions, to distribute universal service support to unserved areas across the country. And most recently, we conducted the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund Phase 1 auction, also known as Auction 904. And that awarded $9.2 billion to bring broadband to over 5 million unserved locations throughout the country. many of which are in New Hampshire. And I'm happy to talk with you about this today and to answer any questions that you may have about the program or about any of the other work that the FCC is doing in this regard. If I'm going too quickly or you have questions along the way, please just send me a chat message or otherwise a signal that you have a question. So the first thing I wanted to do is to share I can't actually share my screen. It looks like the host has disabled screen sharing. That was the plan that I had talked about with Henry, was that I would be able to share my screen. Are you able, Michelle or Henry, to pull it up, the Auction 904 webpage?
Here, Michael, let me just make you a co-host now, and that should give you the ability right away.
Okay. Okay, so you should be seeing right now, as much as it's been a year of intense teleworking, I think we're all still getting the handle of this. And so I think you should be seeing the Auction 904 webpage. Is that right, Henry and Michelle? So you can find this on your own, and I'm going to sort of just talk through this a little bit so you have a sense of where this information is. You can find this by Googling Auction 904, and this brings you to our main landing page of information about this program. It's updated regularly, and it has all of the latest information about the program. Now, the releases as they come out are put here where we have releases, and it shows you the most recent releases that have come out. The thing that I think you're probably most interested in is the results of the auction. And there's a web page here that has detailed results from the auction, as well as a map of the results of the auction. And if you go to this map, you can zoom into a street address, or you can zoom in to an entire state and see the results from the auction in that particular state. You also then can go into these particular areas and see how much support was awarded. And you can also sort of understand which block groups was the basis for that support. And you can see which bidder won the support there. So this in this particular area was a consortium. And you can see what level of support they bid on. In this case was gigabit service. And so you can look at the actual results in your area yourself, and you can see which bidder has been awarded support in that area. As you can see from this map, and the overwhelming majority of area that was awarded support in the auction was awarded support for gigabit service. Some of it was for above baseline, which would be at least 100 megabits per second. And so you can look at these results yourself. If you're interested in more detailed information about these bidders, there are ways to access that. A large amount of information has been released publicly, as well as for the actual process for the auction in terms of how support was won in those areas. If you look at this page, which is on the fact sheet tab, this gives you a sense of where we are in the process. So last July, we opened up the window for applicants to bid for support in the program. It was a 2-week window. Applications that were submitted on time were then reviewed. A number of those bidders, we had 505 applicants, 386 applicants made it through the process. They were given the opportunity to participate in a mock auction. We completed that mock auction. We started the auction in late October, and then the auction, it concluded in late November. We are now going through a process where we are taking in long form applications to evaluate whether or not those winning bidders should actually be given money to deploy broadband. The deadline for those long form applications is this Friday, January 29th. And then we will begin processing those applications as quickly as possible. In order to receive support from this program, you have to be a designated eligible telecommunications carrier in your state, an ETC, which can be a long process in some states. You also have to submit a very detailed technical submission so that we understand what type of network you're planning on deploying and whether or not you have the competency to deploy that network. At the end of the process, you also have to submit an irrevocable letter of credit to get a bank to stand behind you and say, if you don't perform, we can draw on that letter of credit. And then we will authorize support. And once support has been authorized, it is paid out in equal monthly payments over a 10-year term of support. And so we are going to try to move those applications as quickly as possible. It's possible that we could get some support authorized as soon as the second quarter of this year. but it depends on how quickly the applications are completed, and we have to, how quickly we can resolve them. As mentioned, there is a significant amount of money that has been awarded to New Hampshire. And of that $25 million, there's close to 18,000 locations to 4 winning bidders. And so we need to work through long form applications from at least 4 companies and process them as quickly as possible before they can start deploying. Once they have received the award of support, they receive support over 10 years to deploy broadband. They need to reach all location that are based upon the estimate, the model, within 6 years, and all actual locations within 8 years. This program was focused on completely unserved census blocks, so it does not reach every unserved location in the state, but it will provide service to every location, every actual location in any eligible census block. And the development of the eligible census blocks was a long process that occurred over last year, starting with the release of a preliminary list of eligible areas in March, an updated list in June, and a final list in October. So that's where we are in the process. It's an intensive effort to try to get broadband out to you as quickly as possible and to get this funding to the companies that want it as quickly as possible. I could talk about this program for a very long time, but as I talked about with Henry last week, I think it's best for me to stop there, having shown you where the resources are about the program on our webpage, and also giving you a brief overview, and take questions from you so I can answer best interface with your concerns or your questions about the program at this time.
Thanks, Michael. That was a great intro. And for folks who have a question on this topic, please just use the raise your hand feature, or if you're very smooth, just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask it. I see a question from Brad Roscoe. Why don't you go ahead, Brad?
Yeah, thanks for the update. One of the problems we've had with the FCC mapping is the fact that census blocks, your definition of coverage. We've had problems in the past with the inaccuracy of the maps, basically because your definition is if one house in a census block is covered, you assume the entire census block is covered. This lack of granularity has caused funding to go to actually better served census blocks rather than worse served census blocks. I was wondering what has been done to correct this problem, because I know there was supposedly a program to do this last year, but the FCC didn't seem to be willing to accept any information as requested. And so I have questions on that. And part 2 is, in your giving of money, are you prioritizing things by technology? For example, I would have trouble seeing taxpayers' money being spent on archaic DSL technology rather than something else that's better than DSL.
Thanks a lot for all of those very good questions. So the first one is, the Commission agrees with you that our data collection process should improve. And the Commission has launched the new Digital Opportunity Data Collection, the DODC, to get at many of the issues that you've raised. The Digital Opportunity Data Collection is an ongoing effort, a high priority effort that the numerous staff are working on. Congress just allocated the money that's going to be required for this auction, this data collection effort, which is almost $100 million. And it's a top priority for us moving forward. We agree that the data should be more accurate and that it should be more granular, and that is ongoing. You can look, all that information is on our website. And so if you go to the website and you look up DODC, you'll find all of that information. With regard to the accuracy of the data, each of these programs has to take a snapshot of data at a moment in time and deal with very difficult issues about where to spend the limited funds at that moment in time. And so for this phase of the program, the Commission decided to focus our limited money on completely unserved census blocks because they were seen as most in need of support. And you're right that that meant that some census blocks that somebody might think didn't need as much support, may not have gotten funding in this program, and it also didn't get money to partially served blocks. But what the Commission also did is it said that we were going to have a 2-phased approach to this fund. The first phase would focus on completely unserved census blocks. And then the second phase of the fund would focus on partially served census blocks and blocks that we have identified as unserved through the new digital opportunity data collection. The total budget for the fund is $20.4 billion. The first phase of the fund used $9.2 billion, which means potentially almost $11 billion is available for the second phase of the fund. And there's a lot of issues there that are going to have to be worked through, and the commission has to go through notice and comment and take an input from outside stakeholders like yourself in terms of how to deal with directing money to partially served census blocks, which is very complicated in and of itself. The Commission for the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund Phase 1 did have a process that was open to state stakeholders to identify census blocks that should not receive support. And a number of states did take part in that process. Your neighboring state, Vermont, filed with us as part of that challenge process. And we did take areas out of the auction because of Vermont's filing, but New Hampshire did not participate in that process. We may have another process like that in the future, but that's ultimately for the next commission to decide in terms of how to establish eligible areas, which is an incredibly complicated process. And it took us most of last year to establish those eligible areas. One of the things that I can say, and you'll see this in the digital opportunity data collection, is that there's a whole work stream there set up to take in information from consumers and from state and local governments about the accuracy of the broadband maps. And so that is baked into the process that was in the enabling legislation, and that's part of the process going forward. And so, I can assure you that everyone agrees that the data collection should get better. We are working on it. We ultimately are relying upon representations from providers, but we are working on making the data collection and the data that we collect from those providers better. In terms of technology, these programs have been technologically neutral, but they have focused more of our money on technologies and programs and proposals that can provide faster speeds. So it was possible to bid in the most recent auction using advanced DSL, but the vast majority of winning bids were to those entities that were proposing to use very fast technologies. Almost 85% of the winning bids went to gigabit technologies, which are overwhelmingly fiber. Some of them are fixed wireless, some of them are satellite, but the way that the auction was designed was to focus our limited funds on proposals that could offer the highest speeds and the lowest latencies, regardless of the particular technology. So I see another question from Todd Horner about if winning bidders don't submit the long form application, or if the long form application is rejected. Well, a winning bidder who does not submit a long form application would default, and there are penalties for defaulting. And that would be the same process if a long form application is ultimately rejected, which is that they would be defaulted, and there would be penalties brought against them for winning support in the auction, but then not completing the process. Are there safeguards in place to monitor? Yes. The deployment, yes. There's an entire comprehensive enforcement and monitoring and compliance framework that was established in January of 2020 in the report and order that established the framework. There are huge financial penalties for not deploying in accordance with the requirements. Their compliance with the program is monitored by USAC through reporting of deployments through the hub. They have a requirement once to deploy to a location. That means that they need to be able to hook somebody up with service within 10 business days. And so there's a very stringent compliance framework that's been established, and that certainly is baked into the program as well. Those are great questions. Thank you, Todd. Dana Pinney is asking about whether or not areas that received an award in the first auction be eligible to receive additional funds in round 2 of the auction. That's up to the future commission. The eligibility for the next phase of the fund is something that the current commission or the future commission will have to put out for comment. So we will issue a notice of proposed rulemaking that will say, here is how we intend to establish eligibility. We will take comments on that, and then we will ultimately adopt an eligibility criteria. That being said, areas that won support in CAF Phase 2 or Auction 903, which we concluded in 2018, were not eligible for support in RDOF Phase 1. And the reason for that was because we need to focus our limited funds on the areas that need it the most. And the commission felt that an area that had been awarded money in 2018 was not an area that most needed support in 2020. But that question is up to ultimately to a future commission to determine in terms of what the eligibility should be. Another factor of this is that our standards for whether or not an area has broadband have been evolving. At one time, 4 megabits per second down, 1 megabits per second up was sufficient. In this most recent phase of the auction, we used 25.3. And there's been calls to increase that standard even higher. And that all would have to be a part of the decision about what would be an eligible area in the next phase of the fund. Dana is asking a follow-up question. Thank you, Dana. I love all these questions. Please keep them coming. A fiber network can show that the cable runs by an unserved address. Starlink received large grants. How does their system fit into serving specific unserved areas? Well, the auction was technologically neutral, and it was open to any technology that could pass through the short form application process. There was a satellite provider that it was more than one satellite provider that passed through that process. I don't want to say too much, about their plans, because they ultimately need to file further plans, and we need to evaluate those plans to determine whether or not they should ultimately get some money. And even though I'm talking about awarding money, nobody has actually gotten any money yet. There's a long process before anybody actually gets money. They've been awarded money in the auction, and now we go into the second phase of the program to determine whether or not they should actually receive that support. But part of the solution to getting broadband out to unserved areas has been to use a mix of technologies. And the commission has not wanted to say that fixed wireless or satellite are not part of the solution. They may very well be part of the solution in certain areas. Whether or not somebody, if there's a particular address where somebody already has a wireline connection there, that may be an issue where with the data that goes back to Brad's question originally. It may be a situation where we were not told about that particular deployment. As I said, we have to move forward at certain moments in time. There's a tremendous amount of pressure for us to get this money out as quickly as possible. In this previous phase of the fund, we announced eligible areas in March of 2020. We took in feedback and comment on those eligible areas, and then we released an updated list in June. We did further refinements and then released a final list in October, and then we commenced the auction later that month. So I can't really speak to the specifics of the situation you're raising, Dana, but there's a variety of reasons why that could have occurred. But thank you for that question. Thank you, Henry. So, this is Henry's asking about the potential roles for state and local governments. So, this is an incredibly complicated problem, and it's one in which the solution is not just going to be the federal government or state governments or local governments. It's going to be all of us together. And I have enjoyed talking with many groups and state and local stakeholders like yourself across the country as we begin to work through and figure out what's going to work in each particular place. The first piece of this is the data, which is what Brad raised early on in the conversation. And a number of state task forces that have looked at this, the first thing they've looked at is how much broadband do we actually have in our state? And how can we sort of make sure that all of our stakeholders understand what data is being reported for our state, how the FCC thinks about broadband in our state. And then the second piece is the funding. The federal government can provide a large amount of funding through our federal universal service program. The high cost fund takes in about $4.5 billion a year, and we are distributing that out as quickly as we can to areas that we have determined need it the most. But there are also state universal service funds. There are also state grants, and there are also our local initiatives. California has just adopted legislation that will add additional funds for RDOF winners. Nebraska has also adopted a recent law providing for state funding. Excuse me, just one second. So there are a number of states that are moving forward to provide additional funding to make sure that broadband gets deployed as quickly as possible and as a high level of service as possible. In Pennsylvania, there was a number of efforts by the Pennsylvania PUC to try to get all of the stakeholders in the same room and looking at the data together and try to increase their competitiveness in the auction. So there are a variety of things that state and local governments can do to try to encourage competition for federal funds, to make sure that service providers in their state have everything that they need in order to compete for these funds effectively. And some of these things that may be occurring at state and local levels are not things that are obvious to federal agencies. There may be permitting issues. There may be state laws that limit the ability of certain types of providers to deploy. We are not only a technologically neutral program, but we don't have any limitations on whether or not you can be a nonprofit or a utility or any other type of entity that can receive this funding. And some states have had laws that prohibited municipal broadband or prohibited state utilities for deploying broadband, and they've now sort of pivoted and are now allowing for additional providers to enter these spaces. And that's not something that we get involved in directly, but what we say to everybody is that this funding is available to any type of entity that ultimately can be a part of the solution to deploy broadband in those unserved areas. So to answer your question, Henry, I think there's a lot of different models out there. I think a number of the state utility commissions through NARUC have been exploring this and sharing best practices. There was a report that was put out last year by Pew about some of these practices to try to encourage these deployments, and we're happy to support them in any way we can. It's not something that we get involved in that much because we're just trying to provide federal funding, at the level that we do, but there are certainly some models that can be followed. There was a question from Tom about states petitioning to have census blocks removed from consideration. Is there a process for the opposite? No, there was not a process for the opposite. States were able to identify census blocks that they had subsidized, and they would be then removed on that basis. There was not a process by which states could say, I want you to provide funding to this particular census block, because the eligibility was not based upon whether or not, the state had an interest in funding going there. The eligibility criteria was based upon whether or not broadband had been deployed to at least one location in each census block, or there was a subsidy program that was going to bring broadband to that census block. Alfred asks, is there any effort to accept coverage information from individual towns who may have done some research? Provider information can be extremely inaccurate. Yes, Alfred, that is part of the new digital opportunity data collection that was in the Broadband Data Act, and that is in the report and order that was just adopted. You can read about the whole process for taking in information from local governments about broadband availability. Tim asks about whether coordination is underway to come to a common definition for what constitutes broadband, and how frequently should such definition be revisited. And you mentioned specifically USDA and the Rural Utility Service. We are in constant communication with the Rural Utility Service. They have their own program. We have our own program. We have worked with them to make sure that we are directing our limited federal funds to the areas that need it the most, and we're not duplicating funding. But they also have their own program. And so, it's not within the purview of one agency to tell another agency exactly how it should run its program, but 25.3 has become a more commonly accepted standard for broadband, and some states are using that, and some other federal agencies may use that. The question about how often that should be revisited is another thing that has to be addressed through notice and comment, because this gets to how high a level of service should everybody get through the universal service program. And when you think about universal programs like United States Postal Service mail and other types of programs, what level of service should be the baseline is something that there's a lot of different views on. Right now, the FCC has said 25.3 is the baseline, but there are various folks that think it should be higher or lower. And so I can't really sort of comment anymore. I think part of it is looking at usage in terms of how people are using these services, in terms of how much level of service they need to be able to do certain types of applications. You can certainly do email with less of than if you're going to be doing video conferencing. But in this world of intensive teleworking, it's obvious that a lot of people need a lot higher level of service. And so I can't really say, Tim, how often it should be revisited. The program that I run we take the definition sort of as established in other proceedings, and then we establish criteria based upon that. And the criteria that we were given was 25.3. Can you send a link, Alfred asks, about the town sourced info? That's in the digital opportunity data collection that I can sort of shoot to Henry or Michelle later, but that's on the FCC's main webpage. That was just adopted a few weeks ago, and you can read about the procedures that are being developed there and which Congress has just funded. Douglas asks, when was the last time that we determined the definition of broadband? We issue a report every year about broadband deployment, and that report every year includes a definition of broadband because we have to fulfill our requirement under Section 706 of the Act to report on whether or not broadband is being deployed to all Americans. And so you can see in our 706 report every year the definition of broadband. I presume, Douglas, you're asking about when was the last time it was revised, and I don't know off the top of my head, although I don't think it was last year. I think it might have been the year before that we said it was 25.3. For the purpose of our program, the RDOF Phase 1 established eligible areas in January of 2020. So that's when we would have adopted 25.3, terrestrial 25.3, the presence of terrestrial 25.3 as the criteria for whether or not an area would have been eligible for support. I don't see any more questions, although I suspect that I have not exhausted all of your questions. So, but I may have exhausted all of my time.
We're a little bit over, and this has been a great start, though. You covered a lot of ground. We will follow up in the chat with the program you were referring to, so members can check that out sooner rather than later. I just want to say we really appreciate you attending and the offer to pick up the phone and connect with you for a future meeting potentially.
We're happy to talk again. If you have additional questions or you have follow-up, please be in touch. We regularly talk to state and local stakeholders like yourself about these issues. They're exceedingly complicated, but incredibly important, as all of you know. And so we're happy to help out in any way we can. And there's very important and very difficult issues to be figured out for the next phase of this fund. And so we would very much appreciate your input on them. And we look forward to talking with you again.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Take care.
All right, let's switch back to slides. So moving on the agenda, keep us moving here. I'll say Consolidated Communications doesn't need much of an introduction. They have met with many of you personally over the course of the last couple of years. And where staff wanted to bring them into the discussion was in part what Mr. Janson was talking about. The RDOF program, Consolidated, was one of the early winners of that auction process. And as you all know, they are working at a fast pace and with a number of communities in our region, considering the Chesterfield model in particular. So I'd like to thank not only Rob Koester, but other staff who joined today's meeting to tell us about their plans for our region and give us some time for question and answer. So thanks, Rob. I'll stop sharing so you can take the helm.
Good. Thanks, Henry, and Tim and Henry. Thanks for having us today. Really do appreciate it. Looking at the attendee list, and I think, Henry, you're right. I think we've talked to at least half, if not 3/4 of the attendees in the meeting today. So first and foremost, I got to tell you that having Mr. Janson is a huge treat, right? To hear that is the horse's mouth. If you want information on RDOF, he is the mouth of the horse, right? So that's a great win to be able to hear directly from him and how the programs operate and run. So wanted to talk a little bit today, and for those of you who know me, I'll give you the pleasure of knowing I'm only going to talk for a little bit, and then we'll have people that really know what they're talking about step in. Wanted to talk about three things today. It's been a whirlwind 6 months for us at Consolidated. If you go back to September of last year, and this is public information, we took on a new strategic partner, Searchlight Capital, which gave us an infusion of capital. When it's all said and done, we'll be at $425 million of capital. We're going to dedicate almost all of that. Nearly 100% of that is going to go to fiber construction, and a lot of that is going to happen in the southwest region of New Hampshire. The RDOF auction is also complete. Now, we can't say much today about RDOF. You did hear Mr. Janson talk about the long form filings that are due on the 29th, so Friday of this month. We're still under a non-disclosure, non-discussion agreement with the FCC. So you won't hear us talk a lot about RDOF today, other than to reference kind of how it affects our larger plans. Third, and something not to discount, in the last 6 months, we also, from a corporate perspective, have refinanced 100% of our outstanding debt. We had some debt maturities that were coming due in 2023 and 2024. Through the process of taking additional capital on, we used a piece of that as a springboard, or the infusion of smart money as a springboard to refinance the entire debt in the business. So today, we are sitting in a position where we just received $425 million in strategic investment from a capital partner, have completely refinanced the debt of the business, and have no debt maturities out for the next 7 or 8 years. From an employee perspective, we just finished some all-employee meetings last week. One of the words you heard over and over again was transformational. We're going to look back in a few years at this period in time as a period of utter transformation for Consolidated Communications. It is our intent and goal to get as much fiber out into the markets as we possibly can. So today, to give you a little bit of grounding, in New Hampshire in particular, we have 100,000, a little over 100,000 fiber passings. From a total Northern New England perspective, it's about 10% of our total passings are fiber capable. In 5 years, with a combination of strategic investment, of the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, and then ongoing public-private partnerships, we expect to take that number over 70, 75, or even 80%. So with me today are two of my counterparts. One is Jeff McIver. I know many of you know Jeff. He's going to take a few minutes and talk about some of the public-private partnership activity that's been going on. Many of you I see on the call are literally actively involved in a lot of those discussions today. And some of you are from towns where fiber is going up on the poles and starting to turn up soon. I also have Jeff Austin. Some of you may know Jeff. Jeff, for many years, has been our Director of Legislative and Governmental Affairs for Vermont. We've actually pulled Jeff out of his role, and he will be the primary point of contact for all of our new fiber builds going forward. So Jeff's the guy that's going to be responsible for working with towns and counties and municipalities to make sure that they're aware of what builds are coming their way as part of our larger capital investment into the markets. He'll be working with town administrators on permitting. And so I wanted to get Jeff in front of this group so you could get a little glimpse of what he's working on right now, and also to put a face to a name, so that if you have questions or you need any additional information, Jeff's the guy to go to for that. So Jeff's going to talk a little bit about our fiber growth and our fiber construction plans. And I'm going to probably tell you now, we're not going to answer all your questions today. So one of the things I really would encourage folks to do, if you have additional questions, grab me or Jeff Austin or Jeff McIver. We'll sit down and have a discussion anytime about what's coming in your town in particular. So with that, I'll hand off to Mr. McIver.
All right. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. So again, my name's Jeff McIver. I've worked with a good amount of you over the last couple of years. My responsibility with CCI has stayed the same. It's working with towns to build partnerships. So as most of you are aware, and we've talked about this a little bit on the call today, about Chesterfield. Chesterfield voted in favor of funding a fiber network back in March of 2019. We started the construction of the new fiber network the second week of July. Construction of that backbone fiber completed December 16th. And in roughly 10 months from the start of construction, we provided fiber to all residents that had pre-ordered service by the beginning of May. In March of 2020, Dublin, Westmoreland, Walpole, Rindge, and Harrisville all voted in favor of partnering with CCI and taking out a bond to pay for a fiber network, just like Chesterfield the year before. The towns received their bond the second week of August. CCI started construction the third week, and we're just finishing up the network builds now. And our goal is to have everyone that pre-registered for service in all 5 towns online by the second week of May. There are also currently 11 towns that have selected our proposals, and we're waiting responses from an additional 4 for this upcoming March vote. So that would be the third wave. So potentially 15 additional towns we would be building fiber constructions by the end of this year as part of the PPP work. And then the last slide I have to share with you this afternoon is CCI was awarded funds to build fiber networks in 3 full towns and 1 partial town last summer. One of these towns is Mason. The construction started mid-September and we completed the fiber builds in mid-December. All residents in those communities now have availability for fiber service. And so also like Rob had talked about, Jeff Austin is also with us on the call. He's actually now going to discuss our fiber expansion program, RDOF, and other opportunities that we currently have.
Great. Thanks for the introduction, Jeff. You guys hear me okay?
We can.
All right, great. So again, just a little bit of history. I know, like Rob had mentioned, and Jeff, a lot of folks on this call have met with Rob and Jeff and talked, and there's been a lot of PPP work that's been going on the last couple of years, a lot of very exciting work in the last couple of years. So just a little bit about me. I know I've met a few of you folks on the call, but as Rob mentioned, prior to this new position, so I'll be the lead for fiber build strategy for Consolidated. So that means really everything Rob mentioned. It's coordinating internally and externally to work through all the everything we need to check all the boxes, to get the materials, to work with the contract, with the resources, and to get fiber built, and working with the communities in towns, talking about scale, scope, and things like that. So there's a lot of activity prior to this position. As Rob mentioned, I was the government affairs director for Vermont, New York, and Massachusetts. And then prior to that, I was the outside plant engineering manager for Vermont. I spent a lot of time in the outside plant engineering world here in my 27 years with the company. So a lot of the technology, a lot of things like, poles and attachments and things like that, I've been very familiar. And then through the work with the legislatures in Vermont and New York, a lot of discussion about broadband, a lot of community meetings. I've probably been in 50 meetings with communities talking about broadband and talking about needs. So this, as a segue to introducing this accelerated fiber expansion program that we're going to talk about a little bit here, really is something that we've been working toward, right, and wanting for the last 20 years. The ability to get fiber to past homes with the speeds people are looking for today. There's a pandemic out there. There's more and more focus on remote learning, telemedicine, work at home, requirements. That difference between the download really being the key number forever, and the upload just kind of being, whatever it was going to be, because a lot of folks didn't really have those applications that really push that upload speed. That's really changing as we speak, and it has been over the last couple of years. So as we're talking about this, just a really exciting time for us, like Rob mentioned. Really, in the next 5 years, we're going to be building over 1.6 million fiber passings, over 11,000 miles of fiber on our accelerated build program. Now, that doesn't count other programs, right? It doesn't count, the RDOF. It doesn't count things like public-private partnerships. So that's just really the program that we're going to be building. The vast majority of this is going to be in this Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, territory. We are going to be building out in other parts of the country, but really that large investment, that $425 million that Rob mentioned, That's really the vast majority of builds we're looking for. Over 1 million of them are going to be in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. So let's break that down a little bit because everybody here is interested in New Hampshire specifically. Over 400,000 of those 1 million are going to be in New Hampshire. So we're going to build over 4,000 miles of fiber. We're going to hit over 400,000 passings over the next 5 years. And really, when I say that, you know, when we talk about broadband, right, it's always a time and money equation. You know, you need to kind of work both of those. So the money part of it, we're working through, you know, and we've got the strategic investment. That's great news. This 5-year program, when I say accelerated, definitely is accelerated. We're going to work really hard to build this stuff out and build it out quickly. We started with our aggressive build on January 4th with crews in Keene, New Hampshire, Rye Beach, and Durham, New Hampshire. So these are our first 3 towns that are part of our accelerated build. And everything has to match, right? We can build fiber all day, but we need the network, we need the speed, and we need, you know, the pricing that matches what we're going to be building. So that's also very exciting. As you see us out on the streets and you see our crews working and building the fiber, we also obviously are building our back-end network to support those higher speeds because really what we're going to be delivering are multi-gigabit symmetrical consumer and small to medium business internet services, aggressive pricing. Now, we're also going to be building out a lot of fiber here, as we've talked about, over 4,000 miles in New Hampshire. That's also going to be able to support enterprise business, government, you know, cell carriers, anything that needs connectivity. We're going to be able to support across the board. So that's exciting. And some of those towns that we're going to be looking to build over the next 5 years, like Rob mentioned, are in this area of the state that we're talking about. So one of the things that I've been doing, and this is through the Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont footprint, and even around the country, is as we're preparing to build, right, we look at our 2021 build plan, and we want to be able to be proactive when we're having these conversations. So what I do is I use Rob or Jeff to see if they have contacts. I work very closely with our outside plant engineering and operations folks, find the right folks in town, and make those proactive connections. Talk about things like, this is our project, this is the timing, this is the scope and the scale of it. And also we get in a little bit into the nitty gritty about, okay, we're looking to build quickly. This is how we're going to build the network. We're going to attach to our existing facilities, right? So we're going to lash, we call it lashing over our existing facilities on the pole. That greatly reduces make-ready work, and it greatly speeds up the ability for us to build. And we're going to be putting cabinets on poles. We want to talk to somebody about that. Where are they located? How high? You know, to make sure that safety is always taken into consideration. And really things like permitting and how do we get into manholes and parking and things like that. A lot of really good proactive discussion. Traffic control, always a good one, right? Is it local police, or is it going to be, or can we use our flaggers? Really trying to get ahead of that. So when we get into town, we are ready to build. And Jeff, you can go to the next slide if you don't mind. So that's a lot about, and Rob mentioned, and we'll share our contact information. I believe Henry has that. But as you're talking in your own communities about broadband expansion and about fiber expansion and things like that, feel free to reach out to Rob or Jeff or I, because we want to have those conversations. This is going to be an exciting 5 years. And there's even more programs, as everybody had talked about already today. There's RDOF, Consolidated one RDOF census blocks in this area, which will complement, you know, fiber builds, public-private partnerships. Everybody on this call is very familiar. I have to explain when I'm in Vermont about public-private partnerships. I know everybody's very familiar with those. Jeff went over the public-private partnerships. And then where do we go from here if we're talking about opportunities? Now, it's really how do we collaborate and leverage all of this exciting build that we're looking at here with all of these programs to be able to get to all of the towns, and not just all the towns, right? I mean, the key is you really don't want to leave anybody behind. You know, the idea is to get that connectivity equality, you know, for everybody in these areas. And This is a very common theme as I talk to the folks in Vermont, talk to New Hampshire, talk, even outside our northern New England footprint. A lot of energy, a lot of focus and money out there to build this, and really partnered with our fiber expansion program. Really an exciting time to get with these communities. And Henry, that's all that I have just on the presentation side for Jeff, Rob, and I, but we're happy to open it up.
Yeah, I think the summary here is the way to maybe think about this is we've had a great track record with a whole bunch of people that I'm seeing right on my screen right now of doing public-private partnerships to get fiber, gigabit fiber to every corner of every town that we work with. The build investments that we're looking at doing over the next 5 or 6 years are going to catch pieces of that, right? So, and full disclosure, they're primarily going to be around the urban cores where there's density. But urban core is, in this build plan, is a pretty loose definition. It's not just going to be the Manchesters and the Keens of the world. There are other towns that are going to get built as well. The number of passings we're going after is pretty aggressive. Things like RDOF, I think, also start to fill in the gaps in some of these areas as well. So the key question for us really as it goes forward is what's left? And I think the public-private partnerships still have a very, very long life and really are the third leg of the stool to allow us to work directly with towns to say, how do we get everything, right? Because we don't want to leave anybody behind. We want 100% wall-to-wall coverage. And as Jeff referenced, and just putting my product hat on for just a second, Jeff did reference multi-gigabit speeds. The technology we're going to be deploying is the next generation GPON technology. It's called XGS-PON. It's capable of 10 gigabit symmetrical out of the gate. Now, we're not going to be launching a 10 gig symmetrical. We will have a multi-gig symmetrical probably by mid-year. And it's our intention to go back to all of our existing fiber locations and upgrade those capacities as well. So that my guess is probably sometime by the end of this year, if not before, maybe a little bit into next year, every piece of fiber that we have in the state of New Hampshire is going to be capable of multi-gigabit symmetrical services. So that's the plan. Questions?
Thanks, Rob, Jeff, and Jeff. Rebecca Landry, go ahead.
Hey, Rob, Jeff, and Jeff. Nice to see you as opposed to just email you. First, thank you. It has been really difficult to get broadband services to some of our neighborhoods. And everybody hears Keene and they say, oh, Keene's great, Keene's fine. But the truth is we have some very severely underserved neighborhoods. And so what I realized that I have probably abused you in email, and I may I may continue in that vein here, but in terms of making too many requests over and over again. But I just want to say that one of the fears we municipal people have, whether it's in Keene or elsewhere, is that these overbuilds and we'll get lots of expansion of fiber, but the people who are out in the boonies are still going to be out in the boonies and not get what they need. And so I just want to know if there's some opportunity, whether it's in Keene or elsewhere, for these communities to say, hey, make sure you don't miss this street, make sure you don't miss this neighborhood. And how can we make sure that we have some confidence level that the have-nots are going to be addressed? If you could speak to that, please.
And I can start with that, Rob, if that's okay. Yeah, so it's really those upfront discussions. I know Rebecca, when we talked, there was a couple of questions about what about this area and what about this area? Because like Rob mentioned, this is going to be kind of generally in those more populated, densely populated areas. One of the things that we need to focus on is when we're looking at this build, we don't have billions of dollars, because that's really probably what it would take in the end to get to that, to get to every home. So we're able to leverage the strategic investment, the partnership we have with Searchlight Capital Partners, and we're able to get the core network, the central office intelligence, all of that work built up. So that takes new electronics, power, and things like that. And then we're able to expand that fiber, out from the central office as far as we can in each of these areas to try to get as many customers as we can. So the good part about that is that's a lot of work getting done kind of with Consolidated. Then it's exactly what you're talking about, Rebecca. It's like, okay, because we have limited capital to kind of build out as much as we can. then it's working with the communities to ask, okay, we're gonna get to this point. How do we, and is it RDOF will help, I think in some locations for people who did get RDOF awards. And then it's okay, then what do we have? And then I think that's where we look at the public-private partnerships to fill that gap. Because we will, like Rob said, we'll cover a lot of these locations, but we know it doesn't take long it doesn't take you to get far out of town to still be in town, but be in some, but to be considered to be in a rural area. So I think long story short, Rebecca, it really is getting the core network built and expanding as far as we can with the capital that we have, getting RDOF, expanding it further, and then seeing what's left and working with the communities to figure out if there are public-private partnership opportunities to fill those gaps.
Just to add on, just a little bit of an add-on to that, I'm super excited, and I do think there's plenty of opportunity, and it's going to be a case-by-case basis, and that's why we really want to have these discussions with the towns. So if you think about for a second, that urban core of a town, right? We may be building to with just regular capital budget based on the accelerated build plan. And then you've got dots of RDOF around that. We're going to be, those don't just magically appear with fiber as islands. We have to build to those. So if we're building to a census block that's got 26 RDOF homes in it, we're going to pick up every home along that way. So you're going to see those go exponentially out. So what you're left with is, pick a number, 5, 10, 15% remaining unserved. But the good news is we're not building that network from scratch. The core electronics are there. The backbone fiber is there. These are small lateral builds. So the incremental cost on those remaining homes is going to be quite a bit smaller. So I really do think that in the vast majority of instances, especially if we can get that dialogue going with the town sooner, we're going to see those overall cost per passings drop from 5,000 or 6,000 per home to probably something that's a lot more reasonable.
Thanks, Rebecca, for the question. And I see kind of a couple folks with a similar question. And I think it's generally, what are some of the options out there beyond municipal broadband bonds?
Henry, that's a great question. I'll take first crack at that, and Jeff can fill in the blanks. We have to recognize how great, how wonderful we have it in New Hampshire. So I've got a 23 state footprint under my purview. New Hampshire is the only state where we've got a really clear path forward for these really small rural locations. SB 33.3G has really provided a pathway, right? There is an alternative in pathway. We're having discussions with some other states where it really is sitting across the table saying, it's $8,000 per passing. I can't afford to do that in my capital budget. And the town's going, well, I can't either. What are our options? Because they don't have these options on the table. So from my perspective is, how do we leverage everything that's there? I do think that the tools are there. I know some towns don't like going down the bonding path, but it's something that seems to be working and working fairly well. If, Mr. Janson referenced earlier $300 million that is going to be administered by NTIA. We would be very interested in seeing the details of that program once it's out. There are USDA programs that are available. We are open to any and all types of funding sources to help bridge that gap. And I think if our history is any guide, the work that we've done with the towns hopefully will demonstrate to folks that we really legitimately are interested in getting broadband as far as we can, and we'll do anything we can to partner to get there.
Thanks. And Karen, Alfred, Dana, let me know if that was helped to answer your question. And I think, Karen, you're next person with your hand up.
Thanks, Henry. Thank you all. So I'm in Peterborough, and we're aware that we have, so my question is a broader question on strategy, I guess, as CCI is thinking about it. I mean, it occurs to me that having a number of towns that are all around us who are in the process of, putting RFPs out and accepting proposals at this point, and we are also in that process, my question is really like, how does that affect your thinking as a company when we're all kind of asking for the same thing? Does that help in terms of leveraging resources, in terms of being able to maximize what is available, will that drop the cost for us? I mean, how are you thinking about that? That's question one. And then the second part is the question that was in the chat, which somewhat a place like Peterborough, where about 80% of our coverage is Comcast right now. You know, how would it work with CCI? Are we still in the mix for getting fiber through our town, or is it like it's already there and so we don't need to do it? What's the thinking around that?
Yeah, Karen, I want to be a little careful because you are in the RFP process. So I probably can't go too far in that answer, because we do have we do have definitive thoughts about Peterborough in particular, and think that there are solutions there, which you'll see soon enough. You know, from I'll take it up a little bit. We do look at it more from a regional perspective. There is an economy of scale for us when we have a lot of construction activity going on in the same area. It allows us to bring crews in, and you know, we use a mix of internal construction resources and augment those internal construction resources with contract resources. Working with a contractor, if we can say, hey, we've got 2 years worth of work for you, or 3 years worth of work, that drives the overall cost down. One thing that really is going to benefit everybody, I think, on cost is the entire fiber build that we're looking at doing, whether it's the proactive builds we're doing or RDOF or the public-private partnerships. We are literally going to be placing an average of 1 million feet of fiber a month, every month for the next 5 years. So we're placing POs for equipment, for electronics and fiber 2 years in advance. So what that does is allows us to be able to be pretty flexible, right? So if we would win the Peterborough RFP as an example, we're not starting from scratch. We have a lot of that equipment and materials sitting on the shelf, so we can get moving very, very quickly. And we've got crews in the area, so we can get moving very, very quickly. So I do think that overall, from a regional perspective, it sets us up for economies of scale and flexibility.
Thank you.
So Rob, Jeff, and Jeff, Tim asks about communications districts in New Hampshire. They've been a discussion topic at past meetings. You know, to date, this is new legislation. No one's moved strongly in that direction, but we're aware, you know, our neighbors in Vermont have kind of a similar recipe that's more established. Could you comment on how that plays a role in your plans?
You know, I like the concept of communication utility districts. There are a couple of CUDs that are in the formation stage in the north side of the state right now. We've been in some pretty regular contact with those. They give you scale, and they do kind of come at a cost though a little bit. So some of the CUDs in New Hampshire that would look to form right now, I think one of the quandaries of the towns that are looking to be in am I going to be in a CUD or am I not going to be in a CUD is timing. If a town, you know, started moving very quickly a few months ago, they could have gotten into a town vote this March, and they could be building fiber yet this year. The CUD process is a little bit longer than that. They have to go through a couple of additional hurdles. So I think I love the concept of a CUD. From my perspective, working with one entity versus 10 or 15, it's a little bit simpler. It does give us a little bit of an economy of scale, and you got a larger area to build over. But the balance there really is how, you know, what's your incentive to get things moving a little bit faster. So I'm fully supportive of CUDs. My personal perspective, taking my CCI hat off for just a second, I think in the southwest corner of the state, those have probably the time for that's probably passed. And we've got what, 6, 7, 8 or so towns that are in the region that you cover that are already in one form of build or construction, either complete or very, very close to being complete. Of the 12 RFPs we won, the majority of those are in the southwest corner of the state. The 4 that are outstanding, the majority of those are in the southwest corner of the state. So there aren't many entities that are really contiguous that could band together and do this. Again, personal perspective, these have been pretty successful. It's been a pretty successful model. So if you're a smaller town that hasn't gone through this process yet and you want to move quickly, going by yourself is probably the fastest way to do it. But if you want to join a CUD, man, we'll be right there with you to help it happen if that's the way you want to go.
Thanks, Rob. And I see 2 questions in the chat. I think we're going to have to leave it at those to stay on the agenda. One from Douglas Batchelder: what legislative efforts would be helpful to facilitate collaborative efforts and funding between federal, state, and local governments and providers? Anyone like to try that one?
Jeff, you want to give that one a shot?
Yeah, we've actually been trying to tackle that in Vermont for a few years now. And it really, when we have these conversations in the legislature, a lot of the questions are from the legislators are, how can we help you? What do you need, to kind of move this forward? And they've actually, there's been a lot of collaboration, at least over the last year in Vermont, with ISPs, with power companies, right? With CUDs in Vermont, if we're using kind of that example, and with other utilities, just to try to get everybody together, right, and figure out how do we solve this as efficiently as we can solve this. And some of those have been fruitful conversations, and some of those are just good conversations to have, but don't get us there. And then back in the legislative realm, I don't know what the solution is, but certainly if there was a streamlined way to take state and federal money, right, instead of having all of these different programs, kind of combine it into something a little bit cleaner on a state by state level, and then have maybe a state authority be able to distribute those funds. Because some of the stuff we talked about in RDOF and some of the questions that came up were, hey, how do we tell you where we don't have service? Instead of mapping and things like that. So maybe if there was that streamline, federal to state with a state management project, because the states know their states better than obviously anyone else. At least, and we've worked a lot with the state of Vermont Department of Public Service on things like that. Yeah, I like that idea. I don't know what kind of legislation that would look like, but just something that I think would be beneficial.
Thanks, Jeff. So there kind of a couple more questions came in. There's a question about customer service. With all the ramping up, how does that influence, the quality of service the end user is getting?
Sorry about that. I would be more than happy to take that. Thank you, John, for the question. I really do appreciate that one. And to Tim's comment, for those of you not looking at the chat, I'm in the process right now printing out a New Hampshire map so we can stick on the back of Jeff's wall. So he's got a New Hampshire map. Make that situational, whoever he's talking to, get the right map stuck in there.
Exactly. Yes, we should.
There we go. So know that what we are doing on fiber is more than just throwing some cable and some electronics into the field. We are completely reinventing how we deliver service over fiber with this large investment. Here are some things that you can expect. So we talked about the XGS-PON, multi-gigabit speeds. We are going to be rolling out a Wi-Fi 5 mesh Wi-Fi solution as a standard part of the service, coming really quickly here. We're going to be moving to Wi-Fi 6 as soon as the chips are available. I expect that to be around mid-year. We're also implementing a software package called Plume, which, if you're not in the industry, you probably have never heard of before, but Plume is a best of breed Wi-Fi management software. So it gives us incredible levels of visibility into what's going on in a customer's Wi-Fi network. The goal is to be able to get customers who are having issues resolved and off the phone quickly. When our phones are answered, they're going to be answered by what we call an escalation agent. You're not going to get a tier 1 agent who takes you through the troubleshooting list. It's going to be somebody who is an experienced, tenured agent who understands exactly what they're working with fiber. We're also carving out an entire customer service team specifically to handle all of our fiber customers. It's going to be a dedicated group that we're starting right now. That, in fact, they're already in operation. There's 20 people in a call center that are dealing just with our fiber customers for Northern New England. That team will grow as time grows. The goal really is quick answer times, quick on the phone, quick off the phone. That permeates through to our installs. We're reinventing how we do our installations. Instead of the typical, hey, your fiber's good to go, have a nice day, it's going to be more of a Geek Squad type of install. And again, the support is going to include everything in your home, right? If you need help with your Xbox, we'll help you with that. If you need a printer set up, we'll help you with that. So we really are looking at things like proactive monitoring. All of our fiber connections will be proactively monitored and alarmed, just like we do circuits that go to cell towers. There is a real dedication to providing customer care and just a whole nother level of service associated with this. And kind of the peek behind the curtain, we did about 3 months worth of research looking at what do the best ISPs on the planet do? What do they do right? And we're trying to model as much of that as possible. One of the things we're going to be doing is over provisioning all of our fiber connections, so that when you run a speed test, it's not well, with overhead, you're really only going to get 940 meg. It's going to be, you're in a speed test, I want to see you getting 1.1 gig. Right? Or you run a speed test and you're getting 2.2 gig every single time. That's the goal. So it's going to take time. We're ramping all of this stuff up over the next 6 months, but the expectation is by June, all of those things that we just talked about, you're going to see in live practice.
Thanks, Rob. So I'm seeing a couple more questions come in. We're needing to move on in our agenda right now. I really wish we could keep going, but there is some other things we want to cover. I'm just throwing out a suggestion here, but would it be possible for you and your team to stay a little bit longer in the chat to potentially pick off a question or two, or share your contact information with the person asking?
Henry, we can absolutely do that. So I can hang out and answer some questions in the chat as we're doing it. And Jeff and I will all put our contact information in the chat. And I really would encourage towns that have specific questions, reach out to us. We're more than happy to have a discussion.
Rob, thanks to you and your team.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Henry.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So the couple of updates I wanted to move on to are this current legislative session. And I'll start out with what's going on with state bills. And then we'll move on to updates from federal delegation staff. I'm going to keep this part very short and say that there are several bills that have been proposed for this current session. Some of them have been assigned a bill number, and right now you can go to our broadband legislation page and read the bill. You can see the first one involves establishing a study committee around universal internet access. The bill talks about the members, when the report is due, their reason for being formed. There are, I won't go through each one to save on time, but a couple of the ones to point out, numbers 5, 6, and 7 include sponsorship from Senator Jay Kahn or Senator Ruth Ward. The bill language isn't out yet. We're working to try to get a hold of that and share it. Unfortunately, they both had a committee meeting that came in conflict with today's meeting and weren't able to attend to share details. But those are maybe some of the more notable ones that, again, you can visit our website to find out what the bill text looks like, and notably when it's going to be heard in committee. We'll post the schedules and the meeting details there so that you can choose to attend or not. So I'll leave the state updates as is for now. I'm not seeing Senator Ward or Senator Kahn being able to join us late. So I'd like to move on to federal legislative updates that the group may want to be aware of, and maybe start with Senator Shaheen's office. And once again, want to thank Michelle for helping out with our presentation material for this meeting, but turn it to you for any updates you didn't fit in at the beginning.
Sure, thank you so much, Henry. And again, I just want to thank you for hosting this forum where we could have special guest director Michael Janson join this group. I as the folks at Consolidated Communications said, you're hearing it right from the horse's mouth. And I think my biggest update that I want to share is basically just to reiterate that as this next commission builds their leadership team and really focuses their priorities, and as well as the Biden administration as they're working on their nominations for their cabinet positions, I think we're going to have a lot more rollout of these programs that we're highly anticipating right now, including, we mentioned the RDOF Phase 2, as well as that $300 billion or $1 million pool of funds for rural broadband expansion. We don't know what that grant program is going to look like. We don't know what the deadlines would be or the timelines or eligibility is going to be. All I know is that this is going to be crafted by this next administration. And to have a new chair appointed, Jessica Rosenworcel there, I think she's a highly respected leader, and I know she understands the urgency that New Hampshire is experiencing. So we'll keep an eye on all of that, and as more information starts to roll out, we'd love to stay in touch with all of you. So thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. So moving along to Senator Hassan's office, I see Bobby Graham could join us. Bobby, do you have any updates you'd like to share?
Yeah, hi everyone. It's nice to see everyone. I just really echo everything that Michelle just said, but also kind of not really directly related, but obviously we're talking about all this for economic development purposes. So I wanted to remind everyone that the second round of PPP funds has been authorized, and the SBA has been putting out notifications on that. And so if you are aware of any businesses that are still in need of some help in your community, you can get them connected with the SBA or us, and we'd be happy to do that as well. We do actually have my colleague, Nick Malatesta, on the line here. He's our legislative correspondent working on broadband issues from DC. So Nick, I don't know if you're still on the line and able to share anything yourself too. Oh, it doesn't look like he would be on the line then, okay. He was here for most of the call though, but just want to reiterate kind of what Jeff was saying earlier too, that, when we're looking for legislative solutions, that was one of the questions in the chat. And he said, well, just let us know, we're here to help. And would also reiterate that, you feel free to get in touch with us. That idea about, creating federal dollars, getting them down to state entities, and anything that we can build off of to move forward on those ideas are always helpful. Some of our best work comes from you guys. So thank you.
Thanks, Bobby. And Nick, if you're hearing this, feel free to jump in. You're at the next opportunity if we missed you. So from Congresswoman Koester's office, we've been joined by Tom Giancola pretty regularly. Tom, I don't see you in the list. Are you on?
I am on.
Right. There you are.
Thank you, Todd. And thanks to everyone at Southwest Regional Planning for putting this on. And it was really great to hear from FCC as well as everyone at Consolidated. This has been super helpful and just a great forum, and looking forward to staying in touch with all of you going forward. I don't have a ton of updates here on the House side. I think Michelle did a great job, and just want to echo a lot of her sentiment. The Congresswoman sees broadband as more crucial now than ever, and I think a lot of her colleagues, I get the sense that they also see broadband more critical now than ever for health outcomes, for educational outcomes, for economic outcomes. And that's going to remain one of the Congresswoman's priorities going forward. She will remain on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which has jurisdiction over broadband funding, as well as she will retain her seat on the Rural Broadband Task Force. So we're certainly excited about the upcoming legislative session under a new administration, and broadband is going to remain at the top of our list in terms of our legislative priorities going forward. So we will be sure to keep you all apprised of any initiatives that we have going on there, but also would really just like to invite anyone on the call, if you have any ideas for legislation, if you're running into any holdups that you see solutions to, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to discuss any of your ideas, and I think that's a really important part of the legislative process here going forward. Thank you.
Hi, Henry. I just wanted to also let you know that I'm going to post in the chat the link that I believe Alfred was asking for about to the FCC's report and order section on data. So I'm going to post that in the chat, which if you want to grab and email it out as well. But this is the link that Director Janson was referring to.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michelle. And the next spot for that will be on the resources page of our broadband website. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for making this meeting a priority among your many priorities right now. So as we kind of wrap up the meeting, wanted to also engage everyone else in what they're doing relative to broadband, municipal committee updates. What would you like to share with the group? You can jump in or raise your hand.
Hi, Henry.
Hi, Joanne.
I'm here. This has been really helpful workshop. Thank you very much for doing that. I just wanted to let folks know that Jaffrey is moving forward through our RFP process. We're having our second finding a public benefit meeting or hearing, excuse me, this evening, as well as our first bond hearing. So so that's where we're at. I don't know about we, but I am certainly very excited to be moving broadband forward after so many years. So I really appreciate all the assistance from the Planning Commission and being able to lean on our neighboring municipalities for all the work that they've done too. So that's it.
Thanks, Joanne. And which vendor did the town decide to work with?
We have not made a selection yet, so we shall see shortly. We'll have the great unveil. One thing I would say, actually, which I'd be interested to know how other municipalities handled this, is we were very surprised at Comcast's reach across town based on our survey. And as has been discussed earlier, FCC mapping, Southwest Planning Commission's mapping. Again, we were surprised when we got their service area map that it appeared to cover far more geography than we anticipated. So I'd be curious, we can take it offline, what other folks' experiences were with that.
Interesting. Thanks, Joanne. Someone else like to share an update about what they're working on?
Yeah, I'm Tim Wessels with the Town of Ringe Tel-Tech Committee.
Hi, Tim. Go ahead.
We're one of the 5 towns, Dublin, Harrisville, Ringe, Walpole, and Westmoreland. We're deep into our build process, and it looks like splicing is about finished in town. Testing is next, and the entire network will probably be lighted in a couple of weeks, which means that Consolidated will be able to start connecting customers either at the end of the month or shortly starting in February. So this is good news for Ringe, and we're happy that Consolidated has worked as diligently and as efficiently as they can to turn our bonded money into a complete town network.
Thanks for the update, Tim. Who'd like to go next?
Henry, this is John. John Snowden. I was chair of the Westland Broadband Committee. And to agree with what Tim just mentioned, what we have found, and this is more of a benefit for the towns that are still going through the process, what we have found having partnered with CCI at this point is there has been at no point anything different than what they have always said. They've been a really reliable partner, and at this point we're also looking very very much forward to being lit up hopefully by the end of the month. I understand that some of the pricing for some of the packages for CCIT and everything else are where we're going to hear about next. But we're now in the testing phase. So hopefully next time we log on to one of these, it will be with a fiber connection. But CCI has been a good partner so far.
So Henry, this is Carol Monroe. I can echo what the others have said regarding partnership with CCI. So I guess our next challenge in this Southwest region is to understand which other towns are on the cusp of maybe getting a solution in place, whether with CCI or elsewhere. But I'm mostly concerned about the small little towns that have done nothing and will be left out. Otherwise, that's always been my concern about, which is why I've kind of pushed for districts, is that we want to make sure that every town has some sort of universal access to real broadband. So that can be our next endeavor. And by the way, by the time we have our next meeting, I expect that I'm going to be on a fiber connection. That's a message for CCI.
Thanks, Carol, and thanks for responding to some questions in the chat. Christine, I think you've been waiting.
Sure. Thank you, Henry, and thank you to everyone else. I'm in Temple, and we expected to be further in the process at this point than we are. We have been advised by our legal counsel to reissue our RFP, which I don't want to say too much about it because I know CCI is on the phone right now and they have not seen our new RFP yet. Our select board is going to vote on it tomorrow. Our revised RFP, slightly revised. So, I mean, that's where we're at, and we have a really tight turnaround and crunched dates for our public hearings as a result of this. But I do have a question, and I don't know if anyone on the call can answer, but I'm wondering about the governor's executive order. We're a traditional town meeting town, and what happens, and Brunel's on the call too, and I emailed her this question this morning. What happens to our schedules, towns that are presenting bond warrant articles if our town meeting is postponed by a month or 2 months? Maybe it remains to be seen, but I'm.
So Senator Khan just joined the meeting. I think he may be able to answer the question.
Yes, I think I can. The provisions made for town meetings last year are applicable for town meetings held before August 31st this year. And there's some clarification to that going through the legislature now under Senate Bill 2, in case you want to follow that. But there are provisions for towns to hold remote meetings, both for deliberative and then final vote sessions. Just to reassure you.
Yes, so I suspect our select board is going to postpone to try to do an outdoor in-person meeting. So, and I don't know what that's going to look like. They're going to discuss it tomorrow night, but if our town meeting date changes, I'm assuming that all the other dates, like the 25 days before, something has to be posted and the budget and all of that, do all of those dates get pushed out as well? And
you should plow ahead and
stick with our dates that we have now.
Go with what you can, get your warrant article prepared, and
okay.
Leave it be for the select board to determine the procedures they're going to use.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine and Jay. Tom, I think you've had your hand raised for a while.
Yeah, so Greenfield is one of those little towns. And we're going ahead. We have our first bond hearing Wednesday night. And we expect that everything will be ready for the warrant article, and we'll be voting at town meeting.
Thanks for the update, Tom. Dana, would you like to go next?
Thanks, Henry. Dana Finney from Fitzwilliam. Just an update as we're proceeding along. We have our final bond hearing on February 6th and are looking forward to a town meeting, which the select board is trying to have on March 9th. Safety being the primary issue and concern. Just a quick follow-up to a previous question. There's an article in the Keene Sentinel today that Governor Sununu signed an executive order number 83 that pertaining to extending town meetings. So I think that answers the previous person's question. You might follow up there. It may be helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana. Tim, would you like to go next with your question or update?
Henry, you're referring to me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Good afternoon, everyone. I just was going to, I raised my hand when Carol Monroe was speaking, and I guess my sentiment is very similar to hers, is that there are several communities that haven't been as active, and it's important from a equity standpoint that we don't let that happen in our region. So, you know, I guess, you know, those towns might not be represented in today's meeting, and we want to find a way to bring those into the fold. So finding ways to make that happen is something we're going to be focused on here at the Planning Commission.
Thanks, Tim. And Alfred, I'll give you the last question or update.
Okay, I was just going to report that Francistown, we have an RFP out, and the responses are due on the 31st of this month. And we have at least 2 providers that have committed to, at least verbally, that they're going to give us a response, and there may be a couple of more, so I guess we'll find out soon. Of course, we have a difficult distribution of unserved, since we only have about 15 to 20% unserved. So, you know, voting on a bond for just 100-something people is going to be interesting, if anything.
Interesting. Thanks for the update, Al. So we've kind of gone by what I thought would be an end time. We've had so many like good questions and comments. I didn't want to really shut it down. There's a lot in the chat, and I'll thank everyone for contributing to that. I would say, you know, as far as next steps, the Planning Commission will plan to organize a follow-up meeting in perhaps 3 or so months. We'll be keeping our website up to date with legislative, there we go. With legislative changes, so you can read the bill language, things like that. But also wanted to get some quick feedback. Wondering if there's interest in some type of platform for the group to communicate between meetings. The Planning Commission is happy to look into that a little bit. You know, off the top of my head, a Facebook group, a discussion forum platform on a web page are some ways something like that could work. So if you have a chance, leave me some feedback about your interest in something like that to stay in touch with each other between meetings. I'll leave it at that. Thank you everyone for attending the meeting today. And once again, you know, as usual, we'll have these materials posted on our webpage by about the end of the week. Thank you, everyone.
And Henry, if I might, just
Sure, Jay.
Just one to catch maybe before they left, to say that the Senate calendars are getting set very suddenly, meaning that, you know, we're here at the end of January, and a lot of bills that were LSRs, legislative service requests, haven't been turned into Senate bill numbers. So I don't want to lead anybody down a path of trying to look up an LSR, which only really has a title listed. When those Senate bills get written, they're getting sent to committees, and some are being scheduled like right on top of the issuance of those numbers. And so there's not a lot of time to warm up is my point there. There is a bill of state funding that would match local contributions that I think I'm the presenter of an omnibus bill on that. But that bill came from Senator Bradley. It leaves a lot of the responsibility, and in fact, all the responsibility for defining the program with the Office of Strategic Planning Initiatives. That's of concern for me, because I think you know, a number of us had concerns with the way that that RFP process evolved this last June. Part of that was timing that, you know, that office couldn't control, at least not given when the allocation was made. So, but my point is, I'm going to need some information. You know, I'll be glad to forward that bill when I see it to Southwest Regional Planning for distribution. But I would also ask that if you've got some thoughts on how to improve that RFP and criteria for eligibility, if you've got some thoughts that you want to send my direction, that would be helpful, because being able to prepare any kind of amendment to the existing bill, you know, might take more than the warm-up time that we get between the posting and the hearing.
Thanks for the update and the invitation, Jay. And I think you're saying if you have feedback, you know, sooner rather than later, you know, now people, you can send that to your attention.
Yeah, I'm going to put my my email address in the chat.
Well, thanks for fitting in that update, Senator Khan. And we'll, you know, help to make materials available on our legislation page. So once again, thanks. We fit in a little overtime session, which is a first. That's great. And just a reminder to stay in touch. And if you know others that you're not seeing at these meetings who could get value out of them, share the announcement with them and I'll get them added to our distribution list. Thanks everyone for joining.